this is something that an organization like SRI definitely would have known about and would have been able to identify where they were. And a guy like C.V. Wood absolutely would know how to read the terrain and get telluric currents identified. Well, what convinces me that he did that is that Sechery, in his analysis, discovered that there is an intersection of 3 telluric currents lines running through the terrain in Southern California. There's an intersection of 3 of them, and that intersection is located in Disneyland. So, and further, the carousel once sat directly on top of that intersection.
Aloha and welcome to the show, guys. Today I'm thrilled to have a truly remarkable guest with us, Walter Bosley. He's an author, researcher, former intelligence and counterintelligence specialist with an impressive background that spans from the Air Force to the FBI, with a keen interest in esoteric, metaphysical, and the hidden histories of our world. Walter has delved into topics that challenges our conventional understanding of reality. One of his most intriguing work is Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom, where he explores the fascinating and enigmatic connections between Disneyland, ley lines, and metaphysical technologies. Walter's insights provide a fresh perspective on how these elements intertwine to create experiences that go beyond the ordinary. Before we dive into our conversation, I want to invite you to help us grow our podcast Ohana. Please follow us and leave a review. We're excited to hear your thoughts and bring you more thought-provoking content like this. If you have an unusual story or strange encounters and you'd like to be a guest on our show, please email us. Now, on to the show. I want to apologize for the quality of the audio and video during this episode. We encountered some technical issues and it was a real struggle to even get what I have to present to you. So I apologize and I appreciate your understanding and patience. Honor to have you here with us today. So I want to thank you very much for sharing your insights and your incredible journey and discoveries with our Ohana here. Your book is incredible. I really loved your book, The Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom. It was absolutely amazing. And yes, it actually caught my attention right from the very get-go in the prologue. When I read the prologue, I was like, wow, I'm in. And I heard your book first on, I believe it was Mysterious Universe. They talked about your book. And so I was like, wow, this is interesting. And so I wanted to reach out to you. But the really weird part of it, I was listening to a podcast that you did a while ago where you talked about the shimmering light, the story about your dad.
Right.
I did not know that was connected to you until late last night. And
really?
I think there's a connection between that book and this book with the Disney, the Latitude 33. I really believe there's a connection in there. It's incredible.
I certainly see where, just like all my books, I've said this, you probably heard me say it, all of my books have threads connecting them. Each one of my books, truly one led to the next. I was trying to follow up on Latitude 33 research when I stumbled into the Empire of the Wheel stuff. And then when I was researching the Empire of the Wheel stuff, I stumbled into the Juan Cabrillo material that led to the Secret Missions thing. And as I write in Shimmering Light, there is one particular thread that is one of the 2 threads that connect all my books. And it kind of blows my mind because these are threads that I didn't go into those books thinking that those were going to turn up. They just organically did in the research. So yeah, Shimmering Light has that connection. But I also believe that when you start on a path into the weirdness in your life, it just goes to follow that you're going to find that these things are connected, right? It's like, yeah, well, of course they're connected. It makes perfect sense. And since that one greatly, Shimmering Light tells my dad's story, he was on this weird path before I was. So again, that makes sense that what happened to me at Disneyland and what led to the writing of Latitude 33 is just more of the same, I think, of all of that. So, yeah, they're connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that so incredible. And the weird thing, I just saw or heard that last night. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. That's him? Wow, that's incredible. Before we dive into your book, though, could you explain a little bit about your background? I believe you were a former intelligence and counterintelligence specialist with the FBI.
Yeah, I spent 20 years working for the U.S. National security community. I started my career with the FBI, went into being just as you described, a counterintelligence specialist, and that had me on a discreet, covert surveillance team, physical surveillance team, and then I passed the language test, so they made me a monitor of Russian language, translating FISA wiretap conversations of known and suspected KGB and GRU agents working in the United States at that time. I used those Cold War phrases because this was back during the Cold War, the late 80s into the early 90s. And then I went from the FBI into the U.S. Air Force, earned my commission, and went right into being a special agent for the Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigations, and continued in counterintelligence. And actually, for 3 years, while an agent with the Air Force, I was chief of the Counterespionage Operations Branch at Wright-Patterson, which is double agents. And then after that, I went to work for another organization in counterterrorism. It was kind of a consultant and operational support for folks out there fighting terrorists, that kind of thing. And I got to see a lot of the world. I love travel. So that was 6 years of traveling around the world. I was in a different country every month for 7 or 8 months of the year. And it was just the best money I ever made on a job in my life. So just, the life of Riley, it was great. And it would get dangerous occasionally, but, that's the price you pay. And then I rounded out the career in that, doing background investigations for people who had applied for jobs that required security clearances. So I was doing background investigations on those folks. But somewhere, it was in 2002, just 4 years, no, actually about 7 years or so before I left doing the stuff for Uncle Sam, I started my own publishing company with the intention of it being just fiction, pulp type adventure. And the story, what had happened to me at Disneyland in 1981 just haunted me and nagged at me. And it turned out I decided, you know what, I think I need to investigate this and write about it. And that resulted in Latitude 33, which was my first nonfiction book. And, I've just gone from there with this crazy quest and pursuit to figure out what the heck, right?
So you retired with the FBI and then started your own company. Is that what happened?
Well, no, remember, I went from FBI to the Air Force to another organization, and then contracted the U.S. government. So I worked for 4 different agencies, not officially retired from any single one of them, because I didn't do 20 years with any particular one. So it's kind of a unique, weird position to be in. 20 years total, but moving around, hopping around in, what they call the spy spook world, So, I just decided that, the reason I left that work was my son was starting high school, and I decided I need to be around instead of around the world with my son in high school. So, that's why I decided, I'll focus on the publishing company. Right. And, that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing now for the last 22 years, actually.
Wow. So were you one of those like did they call you like an X-Files Mulder kind of guy when you were
Well, it's funny about that. When I was in the Air Force as an agent, I was an agent my whole time, active duty. My first assignment was Los Angeles, and we had a guy who had been a famous actor. I remembered him from childhood in the 60s and 70s, a guy named Michael Kalin. And folks my age, the graybeards who saw, what was it, Mysterious Island and some of the beach Gidget movies, that kind of thing, they'll know exactly who Michael Kalin was. And he came to the office one day wanting to make an offer. The Air Force would provide the secrets, and he and his producing partner would televise it, and so they gave that to me to talk to him about that. And of course, Air Force, we handled it politely, but it was a no-go. So I handled that, and then also I was the guy who looked at the concern that foreign agents, like back then, the Russians or the Chinese or whoever that'd be working to get Air Force secrets, would be using the UFO community to get to our stuff. In other words, ingratiate themselves with UFO enthusiasts to get close to bases or where we test things. So I was doing that for a while, for a couple of years. And I also, just for fun, back then there was a model kit of the silver sport model of the alleged Area 51 UFO, the flying saucer that Bob Lazar, who I find no credibility in, was pushing. But it was a cool model kit. And I had built that, and I had that displayed on my desk as an OSI agent. We all got a good laugh. So, it turned out that more than I expected, my duties did kind of touch on, UFO world. But it was more in the spirit of protecting, the Air Force technology than anything else.
That's so cool. Well, I would love to hear about your story or your book about the Latitude 33.
Absolutely. I'm good friends with a guy named Greg Bishop, who's been around the community for a long time. He had a show called Radio Misterioso, and I had become kind of the informal co-host, unofficial co-host, because I would drive in and sit with him. And one night we were talking about why was the exclusive restaurant at Disneyland called Club 33. And we're just talking. So we, pull it up online, pull up the Wikipedia. And the thing that jumped out was, look at that, Greg. Disneyland's located at the 33rd degree latitude north. And we were talking, isn't that band that goes around the planet where all this other weird stuff goes on and the pyramids over? And we're like, yeah, Disneyland. And we had been talking about my weird experience there that I write about in the book. And now finding out, that Disneyland's on that 33rd latitude. Wow, that's kind of interesting. And, decided to look into it and realized, whoa. I learned about this C.V. Wood guy who was the engineer of Disneyland, who came from SRI, and that just kind of opened the floodgates. It was, okay, I definitely have to look into this, because I had that one heck of an experience at Disneyland in 1981, and I thought, okay, that has something to do with this weird stuff that I was finding out about the origin and the building of Disneyland. So, next thing I knew, the book was happening. And,
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to go on? Oh, go on.
Yes,
okay.
Please. There's a delay. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. The incident in question, the weird event that started all this with Latitude 33, my book, was I was in high school. I was a senior, and some friends and I, we went to Disneyland. It was on a Wednesday night, and this is going back in the old days of Disneyland. If you're a Southern California native over a certain age, you remember that you'd go to Disneyland all the time. Okay, And they were just starting the what was called then the passport ticket. Now and for years, decades, you go to Disneyland like any other park. You pay your price to get in, and you just run around the park, unlimited use, all the rides. But it didn't used to be that way. Disneyland very famously had the ticket books, right, A through E. And at this time, in the around 1980, 81, they were just doing this passport ticket where you could buy the passport ticket and, use the park pretty much like people do now. So we would get those, and we would get these pins and pin it to our coat or shirt or something so that we didn't have to keep taking it out of a pocket and tear it or whatever. And that becomes important in the story. So we go to Disneyland, and the other part of it was nowadays, no matter when you go, it's just wall-to-wall people, it seems like. But back then, if you went on a weeknight or a weekday in February or March or whatever, there'd be nobody there. I remember going to Disneyland, and after 6 p.m., you'd be walking through parts of the park, and maybe you'd see 2 or 3 other people in that part of the park. Those days are gone. But it was that era. So on this particular Wednesday night, it's in February, we were riding the carousel, myself and 2 friends, and it was in the 9:00 p.m. hour. Now, a little side note: John Keel, the legendary John Keel, used to talk about this magic hour that a lot of UFO sightings, a lot of weird experiences people seem to have on Wednesdays in the 9 p.m. hour. Wherever they were at, if it was in the 9 p.m. hour, weird things seemed to happen at that time. And sure enough, this was a Wednesday. It was in the 9 p.m. hours, a little after 9. We're riding the carousel, and I noticed this old man standing off. If you're people familiar with the geography of Disneyland, they know where the Dumbo ride is. They know where Mr. Toad is, and there's a path in between them that leads you back to the teacups towards the Matterhorn. And as we come around on the carousel, I see this old man standing there in a black suit, no tie, white shirt, snow white hair that was cut a little shorter than mine, and a close-trimmed white beard. And I put him around 70 years old, and he was just standing there watching the carousel go round every time we went around. And then then I noticed he wasn't there, and a couple more spins, the ride stopped. And it's like, okay. It was just interesting because he stood out wearing that black and white. And we get off the carousel, and we start heading back on that path that I described, heading back towards the teacups and the Matterhorn. And we're kind of walking around teacups and Alice in Wonderland, and we see, at that time, there was they had benches like beneath the monorail track, and he was sitting on one of those benches. And I don't know why, I just felt compelled to walk up and talk to the man. It was kind of, it didn't feel weird. It was just, I'm going to go talk to this guy. In retrospect, it seemed weirder. So my friends go over there with me, and to this day, I can't remember his voice. But he was a real nice guy. He said his name was Alfred. I introduced myself. He said it was his first time at the park. You would have thought he was like a little child in Wonderland. He's looking around. He was just amazed at it. Like, wow, this place is amazing. Now, I grew up going there, so it's like, and I loved Disneyland. So, yeah, it was really cool to me. But to him, it was just this magical Wonderland. And he had run out. He was almost out of tickets. He had a ticket book. And there were a couple of things he wanted to go on, he said, but he didn't have the tickets for it. And one of the things that he had a ticket for was Small World. So I and my friends walk him over to Small World, and we ride Small World with him. And he's going through there just, everybody, we're all kind of like, oh, Small World. It's become kind of a joke, but he's just loving it. He's sitting in the boat looking around at the dancing dolls and stuff. And we get off the ride, and we head back to the bench where he was, back to that area. And, by this time, it's, it's after 9:30. And I'm thinking, I come here all the time. I gave him my ticket. I unpinned my passport from my shirt, my coat, whatever, and pinned it to his coat lapel. And oh my gosh, you would have thought that I had given him a pot of gold, or that I had this great act of charity. He was incredibly grateful. And I said, hey, with that, you can ride whatever you want as many times as you want. The park doesn't close for another hour and a half. So, go have fun, go enjoy it. We come here all the time. And he was like, oh, thank you, thank you. But I remember him talking to me and the words he said. I just don't remember the voice. So off he goes back towards Fantasyland, and he, just goes there, turns a corner, and we lost sight of him. He didn't disappear. We lost sight of him. My friends ribbed me a little bit for being such a nice guy, whatever. And we go off and we just do our thing for the rest of the night. And, but that stuck with me for years. It was weird how it was just kind of in the back of my mind, and, what the heck? Well, the next year, Disneyland redesigned Fantasyland, and they moved things around. That becomes important later. And the carousel was one of the things they moved about 30-some feet from where its original position was. So zip ahead, 11 years later, I'm working for the FBI in Manhattan, and I go on a lunch break to a favorite bookstore of mine down in Columbus Circle called the Coliseum Bookstore. I don't know if it's still there or not. And off Broadway. And I'm in there looking at, the weird books, because I'd been into this for years. And I pick up this book called The Old Straight Track. And it's about ley lines and weird energies with these things called ley lines. Back then, I vaguely knew about them because they had been talked about in a UFO book that I had read in the late 80s. So I look at this book and I'm like, oh, okay, what is this? And I look at the author's name, and it's Alfred Watkins. I'm like, oh, okay, Alfred Watkins. And I open the book up, and there's a photo of him, Alfred Watkins. And I'm stunned. My hair's raising on my arm telling you about this now, years later even. But I'm just stunned. I get goosebumps because I'm looking at a photo of the man I met at Disneyland in 1981. The problem is Alfred Watkins died in 1935. And in the book, I have that photo of him that I saw. If I can hold that up there. That's it right there. And when I saw that photo, I was stunned. I'm like, oh my God, that's him. How can that be? So then it really got strange. And this was a point in my life where I had already had, in December of 79, I had had probably the most powerful, strange experience of my life. Still didn't completely understand it back then. I had a mentor for many years who came into my life in the mid 80s and was already teaching me about weird, esoteric, paranormal things. So, this was, oh my gosh, another strange revelation. What's going on here? Something weird definitely happened to me at Disneyland. So then, between then and 2006, when I was having this conversation with Greg Bishop on his show, it was just, again, this weird episode that I didn't have any answers for. But then when I started really digging into Disneyland in 2006, that's when more info emerged, and it started to make a little more sense, or at least sense of its own, if that in itself makes sense. But once I learned about the gentleman who the Disneys hired, this gentleman Cornelius V. Wood, they hired him from SRI, the legendary Stanford Research Institute that was involved with the development of remote viewing and all sorts of exotic technologies and high strange ideas and stuff. And this was a guy who himself was into psychic phenomena, okay? He was friends with a guy named Tom Swift, who was a philanthropist back in the 20th century, and himself fascinated with psychic phenomena and the paranormal. And he was also known to be a guy who financed expeditions to go find the Yeti, the abominable snowman. So he was into all this stuff, and he was friends with C.V. Wood. And they, together with a couple of others, founded this organization called the Mind Science Foundation, where they would explore strange psychic phenomena and things like that. So this is C.V. Wood, okay, the man who's working at SRI in 1954, whenever it was, that prior to 1955, when the Disneys were told, go talk to these guys at this SRI. They might be able to help you with, where should you locate Disneyland, and, a bunch of business and marketing type of consulting, right? Maybe some engineering consulting. Well, when they go to SRI, the bosses there hand the Disney file over to C.V. Wood. He's fascinated immediately with what Walt wants to do. He's talking with Walt and Roy. What Walt and Roy don't know is that he comes with all this fascination with psychic phenomena and things like that. So I suspect, and I go into it in the book, that C.V. Wood saw the Disneyland project as an opportunity to explore and test some of these wild ideas that he and his associates at Mind Science Foundation were into. And he was so enamored with the Disneyland project that Wood resigned from SRI and went to work for the Disneys full-time as the chief engineer of Disneyland. So that's when we really get into the weird stuff, because there's a gentleman who I've known for years, who I work with. His name is Sesh Hari, and he does some really fascinating geomorphological analysis and research in connection to what are called telluric currents. Now, people confuse what telluric currents are with ley lines. Ley lines, when they talk about ley energy and things like that, this involves the telluric current. Telluric current is an extreme low frequency that runs through the entire planet. Okay, it's a real thing. It's scientific. It's fact. In fact, telegraphy, the little thing, the telegraph that you see in the old Western movies that the railroad stations would have, the railroads owned the telegraphy companies, and telegraphy was laid out along the telluric currents, because these guys would identify the telluric current, and they would say, okay, this is where you want to build the railroads. If you study railroads in geomorphology, you'll see that railroads are laid out along telluric current energy, and with the railroads went the telegraphy. So this is a known actual historical thing, this telluric current. Well, this is something that an organization like SRI definitely would have known about and would have been able to identify where they were. And a guy like C.V. Wood absolutely would know how to read the terrain and get telluric currents identified. Well, what convinces me that he did that is that Sesh Hari, in his analysis, discovered that there is an intersection of 3 telluric currents lines running through the terrain in Southern California. There's an intersection of 3 of them, and that intersection is located in Disneyland. So, and further, the carousel once sat directly on top of that intersection. So here's the thing. C.V. Wood is the guy who designed physical Disneyland, but he also is the one who advised the Disneys to buy the property that they bought in Anaheim. This implies to me that he knew that intersection of telluric current was there. And he said, you want to buy this property in Anaheim because you're going to see that as Southern California population grows, that Anaheim's going to be the perfect place for your park to be, because it's going to be centrally located in SoCal. So, but what he didn't tell the Disneys, I think, was that he knew there was this intersection of the telluric current. And so basically, I go into the details in the book, but I argue that C.V. Wood designed physical Disneyland to work as a psychotronic device with telluric current and human consciousness. And the operative parts of Disneyland as this machine is the shape of the park, the berm that goes around that makes Disneyland seem like it's in a bowl. it's the berm that goes around, and what that does is that keeps the energy that's generated contained within the park. Now, the part that the carousel played was sitting directly on top of the intersection. You have 3 telluric current lines. Where they intersect, you've got triple the energy flowing through there, okay? The carousel served in its rotation to draw up the energy and then also distribute it, spread it out through the park, okay? Now, Seshari and I have continued researching this, and he says that the energy that is distributed through the park is the telluric mixed with the astral energy of the people riding the carousel. And it goes out through the park, and it stays within the park because of that berm that goes around the outside where the train runs around the park. And in the book, I argue that Wood did this to enhance the experience of being in the park, to make you forget that there's an outside world, even if you're an adult, and to just make you feel good. I mean, think about it. It may be no accident that they called it the happiest place on earth because, this weird effect. And I remember when I was younger, not just a little kid, you did have this giddy, forget the world outside feeling, when you went to Disneyland.
Curious about a natural way to boost your immunity and stay healthy? Well, stick around. I've got some fantastic information for you. Hi, I'm Mia with the Sensible Hippie Podcast. Let's talk about the incredible benefits of elderberries. First, elderberries are packed with antioxidants and vitamins that help boost your immune system. This means fewer colds and stronger defense against illness. Second, they have anti-inflammatory properties that can help reduce inflammation and pain, perfect for keeping your body feeling great. And finally, elderberries are known to support healthy heart, improving circulation and reducing cholesterol. A heart-healthy choice. Llama?
Think about it. It may be no accident that they called it the happiest place on earth because, this weird effect. And I remember when I was younger, not just a little kid, you did have this giddy, forget the world outside feeling, when you went to Disneyland, which increasingly dissipated after they moved the carousel. See, they moved that carousel in 1982 off of the intersection. And what I've observed over the years convinces me that disengaged the device. So between 1955 and 1981, Disneyland functioned as this psychotronic device, which could possibly open portals or bring other beings. So all of that research then led me back to the question, okay, who was Alfred really and what was going on here, the Alfred I encountered? Because he looked identical to Alfred Watkins, but Alfred Watkins had died in 1935. So in the book, I go into 4 possibilities. It could have just been the universe arranging a guy who looked just like him and had the name Alfred to put in my path, and it was, kind of coincidental on purpose kind of thing. Or it could have been a tulpa, you got time-space phenomena going on, and, the timeline, it knows, or whoever is doing this knows that 11 years later I was going to be in New York and discover the old straight track book, for myself. And so therefore generate a tulpa that looks like Alfred Watkins so that I'll remember, or it could have been, one of them it could have been, I don't know if you're familiar with the Tuatha De Danann of the fairy world. Okay, I talk about them a lot because they're one of the 2 threads that appear in all my nonfiction research. The Tuatha show up. He could have been one of them masquerading with Glamoury as Alfred Watkins. Now, why do I say that? Well, because of all the symbolism of that in Disneyland, because of the telluric, all the factors, but his reaction when I gave him my ticket. When you encounter someone from the fairy realm, and you show them an act of generosity, you give them something freely, they love that. They really love that and respond well, and usually with a blessing of some sort. And his reaction to me when I just freely gave that ticket to him, that to me resonated with, well, maybe he was one of them. And because I showed generosity, of my own volition, whatever. So the fourth possibility is that, and this for the longest time was my favorite. I'm leaning more towards my favorite being the last one, the Tuida di Danann. But for the longest time, my favorite was the idea that it was Alfred Watkins himself who, in 1927 and 28, when he was doing his ley line research, stepped into an intersection, was transported across time and space to Disneyland in 1981, and I encountered the real Alfred Watkins. And that explains why he was so, what the heck, where am I? There are big problems with that possibility, but that was my favorite one for the longest time. But like I said, my favorite one now is that he was one of the Tuida. But regardless, it was just this weird experience that was resonant with so much other stuff that I would encounter later. And, I'm still not sure exactly. I just feel like I'm a lot closer to what this strange experience was. And like I said, it was in following up on this Latitude 33 research that I stumbled into what became my Empire of the Wheel research, which was much darker. That involved serial murder, the murder of children, very, very dark ritual magic and Solomonic magic and things like that. And but it also introduced me to Hecate, the goddess Hecate. And boy, was that a journey, because at that time, Hecate, all I knew about her was all the dark goddess of witches and, ooh, she's from hell and all this evil stuff. And my perception of her and experience of her since then is almost the opposite. She's not an evil figure at all. But it was, it was the 7 years of that researching my Empire of the Wheel stuff that I did, that led me to where I'm at. And then it has continued. But all of this really started with the Latitude 33 book. And really, I have to specifically say that it had to have started with my encountering Alfred at Disneyland that night. And somehow it's all tied in. And I'm still trying to pull the pieces together. So that's the background.
That's an incredible story, and yes, your book does go much more in detail. I believe you. I can't pronounce that. The fairies.
The Tuida, and I got this from an Irishman. I asked a man from Ireland, who I had the opportunity to talk with for a few hours one day. I said, I spelled it out, and I go, "How do I pronounce this properly?" And he kind of smiled and he goes, "The Tuida di Danann." So that's where I get my pronunciation from an Irishman.
That's pretty cool. I'll probably butcher it, so I won't say it. But okay. That you mentioned in a book that I guess in Disneyland there's that the sword, King Arthur's sword in the rock, and you said right on the side of it is the two fairies on there.
Well,
the Tuida di Danann, whatever.
You mean in the photo in the book? Because I talk about the sine waves in the landscaping, and that I think is a clue that what they're doing is they're saying to those who understand that there's the current is right here where the sword and the stone is. Now in the photo in the book it shows Merlin, the magician, standing off to the side, but the sword itself, I suspect and I propose, is again an open sign only for those who know that sure Disney did their Once and Future King movie, And sure, the sword and the stone is part of all that lore, of course. But I think they're using that in Disneyland to show you where the actual intersection of the telluric currents located, where that stone is now, and the sword being in the stone. Again, I propose means that it's locked. When the sword is into the stone, in that spot, it's locked. In other words, the mechanism is off. And all of this stuff has a connection to the fairy lore. That's the thing. And certainly C.V. Wood knew that. Walt Disney, this always comes up. People have all sorts of wild ideas about how much of this stuff Walt Disney knew and participated, and Walt Disney was a much more simple man than that. Not simple-minded, but simple in his approach. I do not believe that C.V. Wood did all this stuff with Walt's knowledge. I think what he did was Walt told him, here's what I want my park to be. Here's what I'd like to have in it. And Walt Disney was happy with how C.V. Wood had that drafted out from the sketches of, because Walt had that original sketch drawing that one of his studio artists did, that C.V. Wood engineered the park from that in the practical engineering aspect. But no, I don't think he told Walt Disney he was turning his park into a psychotronic device. Walt kind of, probably would have went, okay, will it be fun? But I just don't think. Now, Walter Knott, who was the creator of Knott's Berry Farm, which is just down the freeway there in Buena Park, he and Disney were friends. Walter Knott was really into this stuff. Walter Knott was into the paranormal. He was really into the stuff, and Disney was friends with him. So it's not like any of this would have scared Disney off. But people get into these ideas that, oh, this must have been a dark, evil thing, and Walt must have done this to mesmerize children for his evil. It's like I just do a face slap, because there's nothing more idiotic, really, when you really look at Walt Disney. I go into that in the book. It's like, folks, this is not true about Walt Disney, but he just wanted the park to be what he envisioned, and he wanted it to be fun. And it's my opinion that C.V. Wood, even though he applied these psychic, these paranormal, extraordinary ideas to the park, he wasn't doing it with any nefarious evil plan. Okay. It wasn't black magic he was doing. He was doing this he really believed, in my opinion, to enhance the experience of the park goer, so that the park goer would have a truly magical experience at Disneyland. And so I think it was a completely positive thing he did. As a matter of fact, all the bad stuff that you can attribute to Disney, the corporation, the studio, and even the parks, this started happening long after Walt Disney died, and long after this device that I argue was disengaged. Okay, so during the years that I say this thing was engaged, that Wood designed, the park had a top-notch, flawless reputation, with the public, and that was its golden years. Okay, if you see any decline in the park, it measurably started after the 1982 redesign of Fantasyland, and just increasingly got worse. So there's the irony. People, they'll hear my book mentioned, they'll hear me talking about it a little bit, and they'll go, ooh, dark black magic, we knew it was evil. It's like, the irony is, the era that you say Disneyland was all golden age and wonderful and positive was the era this thing was active, would have been active. And it's again, since then is when you can attribute negative things. So now some of these ideas were interestingly applied to Disney World. I talked with Seshari, interestingly, just today before coming on, and he had done additional research, and he had clarified some of his previous research for me. And Disney World, the carousel in particular, does indeed sit on a single ley line that goes through the park. And he goes into this fantastic book he wrote titled The Handprint of Atlas. He writes more about these things that if you're interested in what's going on with Latitude 33 at Disneyland, you learn more about this telluric current and geomorphology in this Handprint of Atlas book. But he talks about Disney World in that one. Now, at that time, though, by that time, Wood was not working for the Disneys. He and Walt had a falling out because C.V. Wood, unfortunately, in the late 50s, started doing some interviews, and he would let himself be introduced as the man who built Disneyland. Well, it was Walt's idea and vision, and, Walt didn't like that. He goes, yeah, you were the engineer, pal, but it's Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom. And so they had a bit of a falling out, and C.V. Wood went on to do other projects. The only other park, he was involved with several other parks. The only other park that he was directly involved in that has a carousel on telluric current is the only one of the parks he was involved with that remains open and successful, which is interesting. And that's Six Flags, the original Six Flags over Texas in the Dallas area, which I talk about in Latitude 33. So Wood, he went on to I forget the name of it. It's something Fountain City or whatever. It's over in Arizona, and he was involved with designing that. He was involved with the building up of Lake Havasu in Arizona, and I think he died in the I couldn't remember what season he died in, but he died in 1992. Around the time, I found this out later, around the time that I walked into that bookstore and for the first time saw the Alfred Watkins book. So that happened, the revelation about who Alfred was that I had encountered 11 years before, who I think he was, came around the time that C.V. Wood, the man who engineered Disneyland and did all this, died. I find that real interesting, particularly with Hecate at the heart of all this stuff, because, she's the goddess at the crossroads in the land of the dead. When you die, she's who you encounter. That St. Peter stuff is dogma. When you die, according to the older lore, you encounter Hecate, and she's standing at the gateway to your journey, through the underworld. So knowing that, having learned that since then, I realized, well, it made perfect sense that the year C.V. Wood entered the land of the dead, the great beyond, that I got some signal and, oh, who's this book? Who's this Alfred Watkins guy? Oh, so to me, there has to be, the way I look at it, there has to be a connection between C.V. Wood's death and me learning about Alfred Watkins when I did. Crazy.
Synchronicity.
Exactly. And you probably know this, your viewers, listeners probably know this. Once you've truly experienced synchronicity, you know it when you see it, you know it when you feel it and you're experiencing it. And it's like you eventually cross your own Rubicon with this stuff. For me, it was in 2010 is when I finally stopped caring whether people believed me or not, or agreed with me, or thought it was. In 2010, I had an experience. I said, "That's it. You know what? I'm truly done caring about anyone who thinks there's nothing to this." I just kind of smile when there's nothing to it. It's your imagination. I'm like, okay, have a nice day. I don't need to convince anyone anymore. And that's what synchronicity does for you, I think.
Yeah, and I believe the little fairies is connected in your book with your dad.
Yes, the Tuatha. Now remember, the idea that they're the little fairies, a lot of that is attributed to when people came along and they had to reduce the impact of these beings, they would belittle them. They'd say, "Oh, they're just little fellows." The actual Tuatha are like our size. They're tall and strong, powerful in their own way, that kind of thing. But they went in the lore when they finally realized that being out in the open in the world of humans, the world of men, as Tolkien, would describe it, they went underground. Now, I think that's both literal and figurative. Okay, I think that I do think there are subterranean spaces on this planet that are entirely habitable. And, human history, human lore is full of these stories of the people who live underground. The Hopi in the American Southwest have, the ant people. Well, it doesn't mean they're tiny little ant people. It means they live underground like ants do. And you have this all over the world, this idea of people living underground. And the Tuatha, that's where we're told they went. They went inside the planet. Well, in my dad's weird story, my dad swore that that the UFO that had crashed at Roswell, and he was part of a crash retrieval in the late 50s, and his story from 1974 till the day he died in 2008, he swore that he was briefed in, he was Air Force, he and the guys he was working with were briefed in on what Roswell had been, and that it was a craft from the inner Earth. And they were told it had happened again. This was 1958, summer of 58. And so they were taken from Ohio, flown out to Arizona where this had happened. And he said he was a part of this effort to find the pilot of this thing. And in that big, mysterious effort, he and another guy encountered these underground people. And they startled each other. It was classic. They're coming around a corner in the underground, and they like, oops. And he said the guy he was with, the Air Force guy, raised his rifle, but the very human beings, the leader of the person in front with them, he held this thing that was like a tube, and he lifted the tube and he pointed it at the guy with the rifle, and it's like a switch went off. The guy just dropped and was dead, and it was just from this underground guy pointing the tube at him. And this is a story my dad told for years, and he swore that, for instance, Roswell and this thing had nothing to do with space people. It was people that share the planet with us and all that. So there's that whole weird story, which is a story that, you hear from time to time in UFO world. But then looking at it from my perspective with what I've learned and experienced of the Tuatha De Danann, I began to realize, wait a minute, what if these people that he encountered were the Tuatha? It's certainly the idea of the tube that stuns or kills. We hear the story of these fairy type beings with the crystal or the rod that they aim, or even a tube. It just, but you also have Native American cultures like the Paiute up in the Death Valley area that talk about the underground people who have the tube that they aim at you, and it stings like 1,000 cactus needles, that kind of thing. And there's a UFO encounter in the 60s. The witness and experiencer was a guy named Herbert Shermer. I believe he was a police officer, and he had the same kind of experience. So, between fairy lore and between UFO lore, which Jacques Vallée, his best work, in my opinion, was done by 1995. His best work, his most important work in the field, was done. And that's when he was saying that it's people sharing the planet with us. And that was where I first heard the name Tuatha De Danann, was in Vallée's work. From my perspective, my dad's encounter was them. It makes sense to me that, whatever and whoever they actually are, it's them. But I've had my own weird experiences with them in things I've seen, things that, I felt, just weird stuff. Life gets weird when you start looking into these telluric currents and you start looking more closely at the tuatha de Danann, and you look closely at Hecate. It's that classic thing about looking into the abyss, because when you look closely at the tuatha de Danann, believe me, they know it. They see you looking, and they are there. It has its impact on you, and you can never go back to the way it was before. Once you've experienced it, you've gone through a door, and there's no going back through that door. And actually, I don't want to go back through that door. Life has been so much more fascinating and enlightening. It can be tough, but there's no way I would have wanted to do it without these experiences and this knowledge from those experiences, because I feel like I'm still on the adventure and there's more to come.
Yeah, that's true. I want to be respectful of your time. Before we wrap up, I saw that you have an upcoming event in October 11, 2024. What is that? I can't even pronounce that.
It's called NYMZA, NYMZA, and it's this fun event that celebrates the work of a guy named Charles Delshau and his story of the mysterious Sonora Aero Club, a group of gentlemen in California, Northern California, just right there by Yosemite, who in the 1850s were allegedly building flying machines. Now, these were machines that defied gravity under controlled power. These were not balloons. These were not, Zeppelins or anything like that. It's this wonderful mystery that, I got into and started pulling threads and discovered the connection between the Sonora Aero Club, what they did, and the 1890s airship mystery, and then how both of those connect directly to the exotic technologies of World War II. And NYMZA is the mysterious organization that Delshau claimed was the sponsor of the Sonora Aero Club and other groups like it, okay? And so we call our event NYMZACon because it's a fun word. And it's going to be up in Sonora, California, where this Aero Club built and flew their flying machines 10 years before the American Civil War, in the 1850s, flying machines, okay, that were not balloons. So, for 3 days, we're going to have lectures on Saturday in Sonora, downtown there. On Sunday, a local historian gives us an amazing tour of where the Sonora Aero Club used to hang out and fly their machines, and all sorts of other interesting things happen. And it's just a lot of fun celebrating the nerdy goodness, which is Delshau and NYMZA and the Sonora Aero Club. But yeah, October 11th through 13th, and people can get tickets if they're interested at walterbosley.com. And it's a lot of fun. If you like events, that's really half the reason we're doing this, is so that like-minded folks can just get together and have a lot of fun over a weekend and learn something new and weird.
That's so cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Walter. It's clear you approached this investigation that you did very thorough, unbiased perspective, providing multiple scenarios. I know we didn't get into all of it, or the exact details, but you definitely gave that to us so we can come to our own conclusion. We can connect the dots ourselves. And you have a very meticulous eye for detail. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you for
I
having
love
me
it.
on. I
Yeah.
appreciate your interest, and I hope
Yeah.
your audience finds it interesting. They can get the book Latitude 33 also at walterbosley.com. One place to get all the stuff. And I am working on finally at long last the follow-up that hopefully will provide answers to some of the unanswered questions, like where did C.V. Wood get the idea for doing this, and who was placing carousels at the turn of the century on telluric currents. So the follow-up will be coming out soon, but in the meantime, like I said, they can get the first book now at the site.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really,
Thank you.
really appreciate it. And that brings us to an end of another episode. I want to thank my guest, Walter Bosley, for joining us today and sharing his incredible insights. As always, I want to remind everyone that the opinion and views expressed by my guest are not necessarily my own. We bring on unique voices to learn from each other, even if we don't agree on everything. This diversity of thought is what makes our discussions so enriching. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a positive review, follow, and subscribe. I aim to keep the show free, but running it is very expensive. So to help with this, I include links with discount codes in the show notes. If you make a purchase through these links, it supports the show without any extra cost to you. In the meantime, if you find it in your heart to support the show, consider buying me a coffee or make a small donation. Every bit helps keep the show going. Thank you for all your support and for being part of this journey. Remember, ley lines aren't just lines on a map. They are mystical threads that weave together the fabric of our world. Don't forget, guys, leave a 5-star rating, write a review, and subscribe. Ahui ho kako. Bye.
Cause lately I've been screaming YOLO, cause lately I've been moving solo, been moving dolo. People see me, they be like, stop, let's take a photo. Can't let nobody take my mojo, can't take my mojo. Cause lately I've been screaming YOLO, cause lately I've been moving solo, been moving dolo. People see me, they be like, stop, let's take a photo. Can't let nobody take my mojo, can't take my mojo. Today's a good day, I'm living my life to the fullest, don't need no champagne. Drunk on life, got me feeling good like Sunday. I'm doing this all to the fullest, and maybe one day, it go like $1, $2, $3, and that's $4 in my pocket, but I'm wanting more. I'm so happy outside to my core. Life so sweet, don't need no candy. Cause lately I've been screaming YOLO, cause lately I've been moving solo, been moving dolo. People see me, they be like, stop, let's take a photo. Can't let nobody take my mojo, can't take my mojo. Cause lately I've been screaming YOLO, cause lately I've been moving solo, been moving dolo. People see me, they be like, stop, let's take a photo. Can't let nobody take my mojo, can't take my mojo. Today's a fun day, and it's a bum day, but damn, I'm still fresh to death for the runway. Don't care what they say, because you only live once, can't replay. Today's a fun day, and it's a bum day, but damn, I'm still fresh to death for the runway. Don't care what they say, because you only live once, can't replay. Cause lately I've been screaming YOLO, cause lately I've been moving solo, been moving dolo. People see me, they be like, stop, let's take a photo. Can't let nobody take my money.